Okay, I think it's probably time. So what I'm going to do tonight is hi Kathy. What I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to talk about blanket stitch. Where it left me then. Um, and I'm going to be showing you how to thread it on the baby lock, but it doesn't matter if you don't have a baby lock. Stay with me because there are other things that are useful in this presentation about blanket stitch. I'm having a blanket stitch. That was good. Right. So I have done in the past, a long while ago, I made this little baby's jacket and I did all the edges with blanket stitch and it's a fleece jacket. And I just think blanket stitch is such a great edging stitch for those softer fabrics like fleece and boiled wool. And I don't actually have one in my wardrobe at the moment, but when I worked in China, I always had a boiled wool jacket because they were so comfy and warm. And nearly all of them were finished with blanket stitch. And while you can do blanket stitch on your sewing machine, it's not an edge stitch like it is on the serger. So this is really a great thing that the serger does. And I think a lot of people don't realize they have it. And a lot of times people ask, what stitch should I put on the edge of a fleece blanket or a baby's burp cloth or something like that? And if you're using a soft fabric and you want a soft edge, then this is just a great stitch for that. So somebody asked for the pattern on this. I didn't actually make a pattern. I just cut it out and sewed it. It I made it for one of my grandchildren. This is a standing joke because I make all these things for them and I never give them to them. So I think that was for Claire. She's 6 now, so it won't fit her. Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just check. Oh, I'm going to say to you that if you don't have a baby lock machine with automatic threading, then please do look at your manual because it will have instructions on how to thread up for blanket stitch. Okay, so it may be different if you have a different machine. And I'm going to be using decorative thread in the needle. And actually, on this occasion, I'm going to use exactly the same type of thread in the lower looper because it gives me a firmer edge. When I did the baby's jacket, I used a regular cotton, but on this one, I used 8-weight Wonderfill Eleganza cotton, and in the back, I used a solid of the same thread. Okay, so it just gives a firmer edge. If you wanted a softer edge, then just use it in the needle. But there's several things to say about that. So I want to make sure I stick to my notes. So that's why I'm looking over here. Right. Okay. The other thing I want to say is that this is a two-thread stitch. So we use that terrifying thing called the subsidiary looper, or it's sometimes called a two-thread converter. And I kind of find whenever people see that, they decide they're not going to do a stitch involving that. And it's really such a simple thing. So we're going to have a look at that as well. So let me start off with the needle because we're going to be using an 8-weight thread, and that is quite thick, thicker than you could use on a sewing machine. And to make the job easier, we can use a top stitch needle. Okay, we can use a top stitch needle on the serger side of the machine. So in the O1 and O2 needles or the left and right needle. We can't use top stitch necessarily in the chain needles, but that's another story. And I'm not going to go off track, but I always feel I have to say that. So the advantage of using the top stitch needle is just that it has a bigger eye, okay? And the other thing that I always use, and this is important, is I use needle threaders, which are just here. They're very small, so they're often hard to find. And these are drits, and they're 6-looped needle threaders. And what makes them so great is they're very fine, and I can get really heavyweight cotton through my needle fairly easily because I'm going to demo it. So I'm going to give myself, little bit of leeway there. Um, but I do find they work a treat. Now, what I don't want you to do, what I absolutely don't want you to do, is to use your automatic needle threader, particularly if you have the Triumph with the truly automatic needle threader. I don't want you to use that because this is a heavier weight thread and it could damage your threader. Okay, so does everybody understand that? Um, we're not going to use automatic needle threaders. Right. I am going to just gonna have a quick look at notes. Backdrop is looking nice and full with projects again. I cheated. They're still in the suitcase. I just hung a few up. I did want to show you this one because I just finished it. It's the table runner for my improvised set that goes with my cushion. Okay. So I have got those done. So that's progress. I'm actually doing quite well getting things done. Won't last. Right. So a regular sewing machine top stitch needle. Yes, Anne, a regular sewing machine top stitch needle. Okay, I'm going to bring in the other camera so that I can, there we go, show you how I'm threading. Okay. So I have already threaded my lower looper here, and I've threaded it with 8-weight thread. And I always tell everybody my favorite looper is the lower looper because I actually don't know an instance where it doesn't thread the same way every time. So there's nothing challenging about that. You're just going to thread your lower looper as per normal. And this is on the Baby Lock automatic machines. Okay, so check your manual if you have a different machine. Right, so I've threaded my lower looper with the decorative thread. Now I have to thread my second thread because there's only 2 threads, all right? So I have my, you can't see it because I can't get the whole thing in, but I have exactly the same thread, an 8-weight Wonderful Eleganza, and it is sitting on my overlock needle 1 spool pin. It's going up through the aerial arm at the O1 point, and then it's going to take a jump and it's going to go over to my upper looper. Okay, so that's unusual, so it's a good place to catch people out. And the next thing I'm going to do is close my tubes and thread this thread, and my foot is up. Okay, so I'm going to really try and get this through without using a thread carrier. So everybody wish for me. I did it. I did it. So that's pretty impressive. That's an 8-weight thread going through. And how did I do it? Well, I just hold it up to help it and hope for the best. And most of the time it goes through. So I've threaded it through, but that actually isn't what I need to do. I have threaded it all the way through, but this is what I want you to watch. I'm now going to open my tubes. I'm going to take my Allen key and I'm going to pull that thread out of the upper looper tube. I know you can't see that well, but it's straight ahead where they open. And I'm going to take that thread and I am going to put it in the needle area here and go up and over and into my machine needle here. Okay, so just a bit of a different route. I've pulled my thread out from the tube area to go straight up and over and into the needle. And now we get the challenge of threading the needle. My favorite part. I'm going to put my foot down because it gives me more room to do it. And I do have a little tip because it's not always so easy to see the eye as you get older, I have discovered. And I swear when I thread, I actually can't see the hole, I just know where it is. But on this occasion, what I'm going to do is I am going to take a yellow post-it note and I am going to put it behind the needle and I'm going to take my Dritz loop needle threader. It's a blunt end this end and it's a loop on this end, okay? And I'm just going to poke it through the eye and hope for the best. And it's through. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to put my thread through the loop. There we go. And then I'm going to pull it through the needle. Now, people always get nervous at this point because you do have to give it a little tug. And now I have never broken a needle doing this. So this could be the moment. But I'm going to hold on to the needle with one finger and just give it a little tug. And it went through and I didn't break the needle. Gosh, this is going too well. Right. So I'm going to lift my foot. And I do have a few other things to say before we stitch. So where is the subsidiary looper? The subsidiary looper is this metal thing that flips over into the eye of the upper looper. Okay, now it has a little point on the end, and sometimes it doesn't quite go into the eye. So I want you to trying to get in the picture. I want you to make sure the little point on the end of the subsidiary looper does actually go in the eye. Sometimes it's a bit naughty. If you have another machine, it might be called a two-thread converter. And that's a really good name for it because that is all it is. When you use the subsidiary looper, you fool the machine into thinking there's three threads in there. Okay? That's all it does. The subsidiary looper fools the machine into thinking there's thread in the upper looper. So I have, sorry, I have that all threaded up. I've got to think what else I've got to do. I've got to put my settings onto 7.5. I want a big wide stitch because it's, it's going to be a pretty stitch. And I think I'm going to have my stitch length on 3. I'm using a wide stitch, so I'm going to have it on A alpha. There's, let me just check my notes to make sure I haven't missed anything, but there is one more thing I want to mention, and that's marrying the threads. Yeah, that's the next thing. So I want you to see here that my 2 threads are coming out at an angle. And what I'm going to do is go back to serging. I'm going to close my front so that it works. I'm going to try and reach my foot control, which has vanished. I think my legs are getting shorter. Right, I'm going to put my foot down. And what you have to do is you have to make sure that you only got 2 threads, so they've got to meet. Okay, if you have one thread at the back and one thread at the front, you'll never get a stitch, a thread chain going. And you probably want to get a thread chain going just so that you can be sure that it's all happening. Okay, do I have any questions? Is this unusual threading path only for the baby lock? Mary says, is this unusual threading path only for the baby lock? I think pretty much it's because of the tubes and the tension arrangement on the baby lock. If you have a Benina, it will be different, but it will still only be 2 threads. And for any other machine, it will probably only be 2 threads. The L890 is slightly different, but you can follow your chart on that on your machine. But yes, it can catch you out just because it's different. People always think the threads go the same places. Be easier if they did. Right, so I am all set up. And the other thing you're going to need for this is you're going to need some kind of stabilizer. And I have, this one's actually one of those ones that you put heat on it and it dissolves. Okay, but you can use a water soluble one too. I just happen to have loads of this, so this is what I'm using. I'm just going to see if I have a smaller piece here. I have a smaller piece, so yeah, it's important to start a thread chain first because you don't want to get to the end and find it didn't work. Right, so you can see here, it doesn't help when it's see-through, does it? But this is my see-through, and mine's quite thin, so I'm going to use it double. And actually, in my usual way, I am going to run my raw edge kissing the knife. I'm not actually going to cut, and I'm going to have my stabilizer overlapping the edge. Okay, so that is going to get cut because I want it to be right on the edge. And I also want to say, I want it on top of my stitching, okay, or on top of my fabric. So here we go. I'm just going to stitch. And you're going to see that when I get to the end of this doesn't look anything like a, just lost my scissors here. It doesn't look anything like a blanket stitch. And you think, well, what went wrong with that? But actually, this is how it's supposed to look. See how it looks? It looks like kind of flat lock stitch. And on the back, it's kind of zigzaggy. So what you're going to do is you're going to slide your thread, pull on your plastic stabilizer, and you see the way that slides the stitch to the edge of the fabric. So you get that blanket stitch look. So I've pulled my stitch, so now it's right on the edge. Do you see that? And what I'm going to do now is I'm actually just going to tear it off. Now, if it was water soluble, you could soak it off, and I can use a pair of tweezers to pull the plastic that's under the stitches. Actually, there aren't any stitches at the back. It's only on the top. So yeah, I've pulled it all off. Okay. So isn't that pretty? And I might make my stitch length longer next time. I've got it on 3 here, so I think I might go up to 4 for the next time. But there it is. Perfect blanket stitch with the edge, and it's quite a nice firm edge. So let me just check what else I wanted to say on it, because there are some other things. So I'm just going to go over that again. You're going to put the plastic on top. You're going to run it along so that it's overlapping the edge and it's actually being cut so that it gets wrapped into the stitch. But I actually didn't cut the fabric. I'm not saying you couldn't, you could, but I chose not to. Will that work on a double layer of fleece? On a double layer of fleece, I definitely would be scared of cutting the fabric because it's quite a lot going on. It's not that it can't cut it, it just creates mayhem. So I would test it first, but certainly you could use a double piece of fleece or whatever. Would you use a blanket stitch on a quilt? Probably not, but that doesn't mean definitely no. I just, off the top of my head, I think I'd do a binding. How important is your fabric choice? I don't think it's that important, in the sense that the edges really, I'm going to come onto my main camera because I'm not actually showing. So you can see it covers the edge well. So if it was something like a flannel, I think it would work very well, or two pieces of flannel. And but I mean, test it on your fabric. Don't take my word for it. I'm just saying I think it would work very well. I don't have any flannel. How do you finish the ends? Now that is the really good question, and that's what I really want to come on to. So when I did this jacket, I didn't, it was a few years back and I didn't really give thought to the ends. But yes, you have these thread chains and you don't have that much stitch to hide them in. And because I did this, I actually bound the collar, but I came down and off and then I came across. So I had a thread chain under the corner and I really wasn't able to really hide it that well. You can see it running along the bottom there. But, but if I was going to do this again, which hopefully I'll get round to, I would curve that section there so I didn't have to come off. And the other thing I would do is I would leave one side seam open. So therefore I could come off at the side seam and then just sew the side seam up and that would deal with my threads. So do you get that? If I left one side seam open, I could sew round to there. Then I could sew all the way around to the other side and I could hide my thread chains in the side seam. But I didn't think to do that when I was doing this. but that's how I would do it next time. So where's that? Oh, I want to tell you my disaster. One time I did this. Sorry, I dropped my fabric. One time I did this and I just used a single layer of this. This is quite thin. You get, I mean, you get different weights with these plastic stabilizers, but this one's quite thin. And I pulled and it tore off. So I was unable to pull my stitches over. So whenever I use this slightly thinner one, I always use double. And I haven't had a problem since. Because obviously, if you tear it, you can't pull your stitch to bring it to the side. So I think that, yeah, that business about the curves really means you don't have to have all those thread chains. So yes, I think it's a great finish for a blanket. I mean, obviously, sometimes you're going to have to deal with a thread chain. When I used the heavier decorative threads, I think that made it a little bit easier. The one when I did this, and this is much softer, so keep that in mind too. I just used the eleganza in the needle, the 8 weight thread, and I used regular thread underneath. Now that is super, super soft. And that's worth remembering because it may be you want it super, super soft. Where I've used the two 8 weights, it's quite firm. Maybe better for a jacket or something, an adult ball jacket or something like that. Would you use the curve foot for that front edge of that jacket? You certainly could. Um, you certainly could. And nobody's asked me whether I would use differential feed. Now, I was actually using felt, so it doesn't particularly stretch. Not this one. This is a good felt. So if I was using a fleece, remember fleece doesn't always stretch in all directions. Fleece generally just stretches across. So for the front seam, I probably wouldn't use differential feed. For the bottom of the seam, I might up it. And then when I'm coming back up again, I would turn the differential feed back to normal. So, you always need to bear that in mind when you're working with fleece. It normally only stretches majorly in one direction. Um, and of course, you can get that with a bias edge, but I can't imagine there'd be that many times when you'd use a blanket stitch on a bias edge. But if you did, it would be worth thinking about your differential feed. Is there a printout on how the machine is threaded? Yes, I will put it up after. But it is a lovely stitch, and it's what fabric is that white jacket? This is a fleece. This is a fleece. It's pretty, isn't it? And I just appliqued some butterflies on that I had on another fabric. And I did the cuffs with the fabric. And actually, I did the side seams with a flat lock stitch. And it was just because it was all about babies wear. And remember, flat lock stitch pulls flat, so you get a flatter seam, which on a fleece is quite a good thing. So I think that's all I had to say on that. I'm just going to put this blanket stitch slideshow in, just saying how great blanket stitch is. It's a soft edge. Check your manual for threading, but top stitch 90 needle is perfect. And don't forget, you can't use your automatic needle threaders. Remember to marry the threads because otherwise you'll never get a stitch. And to use some kind of stabilizer like Solvay wash away or heat dissolving stabilizer. And you'll need to sew it on top. And then you're going to pull it to the right to move the stitches to the edge of the seam so that it looks like a blanket stitch. Okay. And the problems I've had with this is just burying that thread chain and the time when